Okay, so now we're going to do, this is your last assignment for today. And this is differences in perspective with text evidence. So remember, text evidence is quotes from your text that support what you are trying to say. Okay, now we're going to read pages 12 through 17. You're going to do that on your own. And then you're going to watch this video. Okay, so I'm going to do the first couple with you because this is kind of a hard assignment. And we're going to answer these questions in complete sentences and with text evidence. And we're going to use quotation marks when quoting from the text, okay? And then it should say your email address. Make sure your email address is correct down here. All right. What evidence from page 13 of George versus George could lead to conflict because the colonists would want to be in charge of themselves and make their own decision? Okay, let's go back to page 13. There's 11, 12, 13. Okay, what evidence from the text from page 13 of George versus George could lead to conflict because the colonists would want to be in charge of themselves? All right, so let's read this page. Okay. London, with its 740,000 inhabitants, was the biggest city in Europe and the center of British government. London's residents were proud of their long history and high level of cultural achievement. For fun, they went to masked balls and a theater, gambled at cards, dice, and roulette, belonged to all sorts of clubs, met at coffee houses, taverns, cockfights, chop houses, pleasure gardens. Noisy streets teemed with horses, carriages, ballad singers, flower sellers, fishmongers, and ladies and gentlemen in fancy white wigs, all wearing the latest fashions. But the overcrowded city had its share of problems too. The death rate was high. All the coal that residents used as fuel caused black rain and thick sooty smog. Food and drinking water was often unhealthy, and riots were common, and public hangings drew rowdy mobs. Thousands of beggars and pocket pickers were evidence of poverty run amok. Okay. Am I on the right page? Yes. Oh, it's down here. The English were convinced that the rest of the British Empire was backward and uncivilized. King George ruled 31 colonies and other possessions in many parts of the world, from Borneo, the Bay of Bengal, and all the way to Honduras. Throughout England, people argue constantly about world politics, but they would soon argue especially about about the uprising over in America. Okay, so our question again. What evidence from page 13 of George versus George could lead to conflict because the colonists would want to be in charge of themselves and make decisions? So what evidence on this page talks about how the colonists, they want to be in charge of themselves? It says here that the English was convinced that the rest of the British Empire was backward and uncivilized. And I think this means that the British believed that they could be in charge of everyone else because they knew best. This could lead to conflict because I think the colonists would want to be in charge of themselves and make decisions. So the English here, they were convinced that everything else in the British Empire, everything else over here except for them, they didn't think they were uncivilized, but they thought every single other thing that Great Britain owned, they thought that they were backward and uncivilized. And so we can type here that on page 13, the author states the English were backward and uncivilized. And I think that this means that the colonists were tired of the English viewing them that way. So they got mad. So I'm going to put, I think that since Great Britain thought that, the American colonies let me spell this right. I think since Great Britain thought that about the American colonies, that this will cause conflict between the colonists and the Englishmen. The colonists would not want to be treated in such a unfair way and would not want bad things said about them. I mean, wouldn't you agree that the people in Great Britain thought the English over in the American colonies were backward and uncivilized, and Great Britain, since they thought that about the American colonies, that this will cause conflict, this will cause problems between the colonists and the Englishmen, and that the colonists don't want to be treated that way, and they don't want that bad things like that said about them. Okay, let's look at page 13 again. What evidence from page 13 of George versus George supports that people in England and America would have different perspectives about the war, and would fight about them? Okay, so what evidence here supports that England and America would have different perspectives, that they would eventually fight? Let's see. So it says that throughout England, people argued constantly about world politics and would soon argue especially hard about the uprising in America. So I'm just going to put on page 13, it says, people would soon argue especially hard about the uprising in America. That evidence supports that people in England have different perspectives. Okay, so what you're going to do now is you're going to answer these last three with text evidence. If you have any questions, please private comment. I don't care a bit to help you.